Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 2nd, 2020 edition of the Decaturish.com Twitch Show. I'm your host, editor, and publisher Dan Wisenhunt. Our episode today is all about the census, and our guests are Destiny Collins, who's an organizer with Georgia Stand Up. Destiny, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Destiny. Our other guest today is Tom Smith, who's a professor with the, how do you say this, Tom? Gozada
Goizueta Business
the
School
Go-
at Emory
at
University.
Emory University. I got you.
That's right. That's right. Roberto C. Goizueta is the former CEO of Coca-Cola.
Gotcha.
Named after him.
And he's a professor. Tom, how are you?
I'm
Good.
doing fine. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
We have Michelle Naismith, with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia's She's the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia's Research and Policy Development Director. Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Dan.
And we have, as always, our friend and contributor, George Cheedy. How are you?
I'm great.
Good, good. Well, before we get started, I did want to acknowledge a very serious situation. President Trump was, as many of us have heard this morning, was diagnosed with COVID-19, tested positive. His wife tested positive. Today, we've learned that the president has been transferred to Walter Reed Hospital. We're being told it's a precautionary measure. Obviously, you know, we wish the president and his family well. And it's just a reminder that this is still a very serious pandemic that's going on right now. And people need to take it seriously. You need to wear your mask. You need to use your hand sanitizer. You need to avoid gathering with people, especially people who are outside your bubble. And you need to just stay safe in general. So I just wanted to acknowledge that's going on. And yeah, stay safe, everybody. So let's talk a little bit about the census. Oh, let's talk a lot about the census because that's the episode of the show. I don't know much beyond what I would say is the layman's understanding of it. You know, you take the census every 10 years. I know it's been complicated this year because of COVID. It's also been complicated because the Trump administration has tried to shorten that time window. Now there's a conflicting court ruling. Like, the federal judge says you have to count till the 31st, but the Census Bureau is saying it's ending October 5th. So who can tell me what the heck is going on with the census right now? When is this sucker going to end? When do we need to take our census, if you haven't already done that?
Yeah. Well, I can take a stab at that, Dan.
Okay.
This is an issue that is continually emerging. And what happened is we were set up to end the census at the end of October. And then the Census Bureau in the beginning of August basically said that they wouldn't be able to meet the December 31st deadline that's prescribed in federal law. So instead, they wanted to end it on September 30th. And there was a lawsuit. It's the National Urban League versus Ross that brought up the issue. As a conglomeration of a lot of different groups, including cities and counties and other organizations that wanted them to reinstate the October 30th deadline or 31st deadline. And last Thursday, it's in the Ninth Circuit, and the federal judge issued an order basically telling the Census Bureau they had to have the census through October 31st. However, the Census Bureau made an announcement on Monday of this week that they were only going to go through October 5th. Well, needless to say, that did not make the Ninth Circuit very happy, and they issued a clarifying order late yesterday saying, oh, yes, you will go through October the 31st. And so that's kind of where we stand today. I can say that the Census Bureau hasn't made an official statement, but on their website where they have their operating schedule, they have changed the end date now to October the 31st.
Okay, so it is October 31st. That's the latest.
That's the latest. There is still an outstanding appeal. The administration has appealed the decision, and they tried to get an emergency injunction against the October 31st deadline. However, on Wednesday, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled against the administration, saying that they would not stay that date. And so there is still appeal ongoing, and we're not really sure when they're going to schedule that. But as of right now, October 31st is the deadline.
I got you. Okay, why is the administration trying to shorten the window of this? What's the rationale behind it?
Well, in federal law, you have to provide the results of the census to the president by December the 31st, and then in turn to the states by the end of March. And that is a provision in federal law that actually needs to be changed by Congress. However, the order that was issued by the Ninth Circuit basically not only does it extend the time frame for the collections, which the Census Bureau has control over what their collection dates are, but it also extends that December 31st timeline. And so the official, I guess, statement about why the Census Bureau was concerned about having the census run through the end of October was they were afraid they weren't able to provide it to the president by the December 31st deadline.
I see. Okay. So, Destiny, your organization has been working to encourage Georgians to complete the 2020 census. So can you tell us a little bit about how that effort's going?
Yes. So I am a community organizer as well as the lead for our 2020 census campaign, Stand Up and Be Counted. And so Georgia Stand Up, we are a local nonprofit, a 501c3 organization. And so through that, we really have been kind of hitting the ground running since January to make sure people have been informed about the census, what's going on and what is it. So this is my first time I was ever able to complete my own census. So that was really, really exciting. And I really didn't know a lot about going in what the census was or the importance of it until I kind of started having like this campaign and surrounding and building this campaign. So through Georgia Stand Up, we do our text banking and phone banking, which is a huge, huge help. So through that, we have volunteers throughout our local Atlanta community, and they're able to work with us Monday through Friday. And they're able to call. We have access to all 159 counties within the state of Georgia through our partnership with Pro Georgia. And so we're able to call people, we're able to text people, and especially now with everything happening around COVID, how you kind of have to social distance yourself, and you may not be able to have that everyday interaction with people. You're able just to get a friendly voice. Hey, you know, how are you doing? I hope all is well. If there's anything that we can help you with, let us know. But also we want to make sure that you all know what's happening with the census. Have you had an opportunity to complete it? We do a lot of things through like social media, which has been a huge, huge help with some of our other partner organizations. We were able to have census weeks. And so how we're sitting here having this conversation, we're able to do like Zoom parties. And through that, we're able to talk about the census, what's going on. We're able to get DJs to come on along with us, and just to really get the word out about the census the best way, and through so many different channels, through radio stations. So it's been a huge, huge help, especially I would say probably the phone banking, text banking, and then just all of social media across the board.
So, Tom, you can tell us a little bit about the economic importance of the census. What impact does that have on our local economy here in Georgia?
Well, it's pretty far-reaching. So the amount of federal dollars that is sent to the state, and then how the state allocates dollars that might be applicable to individual metropolitan statistical areas inside of states is based on the population of those states. Additionally, the construction of your population relative to other states is what dictates the number of representatives that your state has in Congress. And so, and if you think about the Congress as being the people's house, where it is that you get your personal representation, right? Each state has 2 senators, but your representative is really in the House. If you've got more people in your state relative to other states, then you can have more representatives. And if they're fighting for you, then it really does become this is in my backyard, right? So, I mean, historically, representatives have tried to push agendas that are specific to their constituents, right? Looking for policies that would help their constituents in their backyards. And so, I mean, certainly we want to be counted, because if there's an opportunity to gain another representative who's going to be our voice, that's going to lead to policies, funding opportunities, we want to benefit from that.
George, I believe you've been working on a column about the census. Without getting too far into things that you haven't been able to verify, What are you looking at, and what have you found so far that you can verify?
So, all right, broadly, I'm trying to figure out whether or not the Census Bureau is deliberately frustrating the count in the sense that they may be getting in between some of their contractors or consultants and the work they need to do in order to complete the census. I'm hearing some stuff from the field about people who have had their travel orders canceled at the last minute. And I can't tell whether or not that's a systemic problem that I need to bring to the National Urban League, so that they can get it in front of the Ninth Circuit or not. I honestly don't know. I do have a sort of a wonky, like nerd technical question for someone.
Go for it.
Census requires an actual enumeration, as I understand it. What does that actually mean? And when I say that is does that mean count every physical body, have a name that goes next to a number and without estimation, I suppose? Is that what that means? And to what degree does the census use estimation for other things? I mean, like there's apportionment and then there's everything else. Like somebody who knows this stuff that I don't, please answer. I don't know. I know nothing.
So it's really, really important so when we all completed our census, we saw the date of April 1st everywhere, like what was happening April 1st. And so one thing that we were really pushing was no April Fools. April 1st serves as National Census Day. And so something that you probably hear throughout our entire conversation through this evening is when we say the census wants you to get counted, it means the census wants you to get counted. We want every single living, breathing person within a household, within a community. We want them to be counted because, as Tom was saying, when you get counted, that means more representation. And so it's so important that every person does get counted because that means, okay, we're able to see like an exponential growth within an area over this 10-year period. So it's really, really important that for, let's say, the city of Decatur, 10 years ago, let's pretend you guys had 2 million people living in your city. Now in 2020, you guys have 15 million people living in your city. And through that money that gets allocated from like the federal budget, they want to make sure, okay, we want to make sure that we're giving them enough money and enough resources to support this new growth within their community to ensure that, they're constantly enhancing, that everybody is okay, and that the community is stable.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to make sure I'm clear about what I'm asking. There are statistical methods that you can use in order to do an estimation of population. Like you can resample in order to figure out what your miss rate is. And my understanding is the census is not allowed to actually use these statistical methods in order to figure out, like if they'll know that they've got an undercount, that it might be larger in one place than another, but they can't use that undercount figure in order to say there are X number of people here for those apportionment purposes. I'm wondering whether or not that expected undercount can be used for other purposes at all. And
yeah, Tom?
If I can, yeah. So George, this is a really great question. So I've worked with some mayors of some larger cities, smaller, larger cities, and mayor. So there's a decennial census, and then there's a census count that happens every year in between. So from 2010 to 2020, and so in the interim, what happens is that the census says like this is the number of people that you have. Now let's suppose that you're a mayor of a medium-sized city like Columbus, Georgia, right? And so you say, I think there's more people here, and they might say to the census, hey, can't you just look at how much growth we had between 2000 and 2010? I think you've been undercounted. We had 4% annual growth, so can't you just in 2020, just add 4%. And so then that's what our growth is. No, in 2020, you have to count every single person. And if you undercount, then all of a sudden your city says, wait a minute, we were expecting 3 million in hospital funds. We were expecting 150 million in transportation funds. And once the census is counted, they say, nope, that's not enough number of people that you have. You're going to get allocated funds for every person. If you're the mayor of that city, there's not that much recourse. You can't just say, well, look, this is the way that the statistics should work. If I'm not counting you, then I have opportunities to go in and fix it. but I have to either prove that there's some mathematics that weren't done correctly, or a certain part of the population that was misidentified because of something like group housing, okay, or something like this. So were people at dorms systematically undercounted? Was I systematically undercounting people who were in, let's say, hospitals, right? So like a hospital setting, a seniors citizens assisted living. So when I've helped cities try to find this, I will literally track down every senior assisted living facility, every dormitory inside those cities, like we're talking, here's a group home at a church, right? If you can prove that those people are there, you can get those people added back into your census count. But you can't just say, we had like 3% of the population were living in dorms, so you should just add 3% of the population. That's not how the census works. They want everybody counted. And if you don't think it's right, there's not a whole lot of recourse. Like, you got to go through some serious steps to get those people back into the system.
So when we see, like, if you Google the population of Georgia, which I believe is right around 10.3 million, 10.5 million, something like that. Like in the census, they do an update every year or two and say, oh, okay, right, we think there are X number of people. That's not the actual enumeration. That's the census's estimate. But when the census says in 2020, our actual count was, and I'm just going to pull a number out here, 330 million people, give or take. Like, that's the number of people that they actually counted. If they know there's a systematic undercount, then we, in our heads, should go, okay, so we know it's at least 330 million, but the number's probably higher. Am I getting that right?
There's just to kind of go back to your original question, George, about like what kind of estimations. I think Tom touched on it a little bit. Like, you have your decennial census, so that's your hard number for the next 10 years that other estimates are based off of. And when Tom had mentioned there's like an annual kind of estimate, that's based on the American Communities Survey that only a portion of the nation takes every year. And back in the day, I doubt Destiny's old enough to remember this, but they used to have the short form and the long form of the census. What the American Community Survey is the long form, and it only goes to a certain percent. Everybody takes the short form, but only a certain percent takes the long form. But in terms of how you deal with an undercount, as Tom had mentioned, there is a process that you can go through to contest your census. And it's a pretty long, drawn out process. It has to be done after the census is concluded for a decennial census. And also, let's say like 5 years down the line, you don't necessarily think you had an undercount, but maybe you live in a city or a county that has experienced really solid growth, a lot of growth. You can do what's called a special census, which you can have new numbers generated, but it's not to deal with a dispute. But those numbers will haunt you, even though the estimated populations are sent every year. And a great example of that is Liberty County is one of our counties on the coast. They had an extreme undercount in 2010. They had about 10 to 14,000 people who were not counted. It cost their county $185 million over that decade for not having those people counted.
How did that happen? How are they undercounted?
Well, that area has a large military base. And they changed up the census formula for this time around in terms of how they do a count. For example, let's say I'm originally from Illinois and I'm stationed at Fort Benning. I'm in the Army, and then I get deployed to Iraq. The way the 2010 census worked, I would be counted as being from Illinois because that's where I was from before I went into the Army. But now I'm counted from being from Casita, Chattahoochee County or Columbus, Muskogee County because I'm being deployed from Fort Benning. That's one change in the formula. But the issue that Liberty County brought up is those people were in their community. They had to have services. They should be part of the population. So by not having them in their count, that really hurt them.
Interesting. Now, you said before we started the show, I'm sorry, Tom, did you want to weigh in real quick?
Oh, no, I was going to say, I mean, it's really important to hear absolute, let's say, concrete examples of how it is that a city, an area could be undercounted, right? And military bases is, if you go, last year, when I was working with a couple different municipalities, I went through all of the census cases, so you can see who disputed a case, and then which ones were accepted and which ones were not. And I found all the ones that were accepted. I called county clerks. I called people who actually did the paperwork. And I said, what did you do? How did you show that you had more people? What did you physically do? How did you go find the people that you thought were there? And then I talked to people who were not successful. And they said, look, we just didn't have the concrete evidence. We know those people exist, but we couldn't get them on paper. Like, we know there's more people here. And so, and we're talking about red cities, purple cities, blue cities. I haven't met a single, in the process that I'm doing this, I have never met a politician who said, you know what, I really don't want to know how many people live here because I don't want those federal dollars. Red, blue, purple, everybody wants money from the Fed, because they're using it for their police, they're using it for their hospitals, for roads, infrastructure, education. They want these people counted. They want that money. And it's not a political left side, right side kind of thing. Areas that realize they're undercounted, they want to get counted. And it's not an easy process. It takes 3-6 months, and then it's another 6 months before they tell you whether or not you did it right. It's very strenuous.
Well, it has become political in one important respect, which is with regards to counting the undocumented population. Can somebody kind of give us a quick overview of that question? Because I know at one point there was an attempt to have a citizenship question added to the census. I believe a judge ruled against that, but I think they're trying to figure out another way to sort of shoehorn that into the census. Who can give us a quick overview of what's going on with that question?
So back in July of this year, I want to say it's probably like July 21st, the Trump administration sent out a mandate and basically saying if you are an undocumented person, you can fill out your census. We were not going to ask the citizens. They're not going to ask the question of citizenship. You can fill out the census, but we're not going to count you. And so that almost was kind of instilling fear for a lot of people that are undocumented or a lot of immigrant communities, because it was like, okay, well, I'm putting out all this information on there. I'm putting up where I live. I'm putting how many people reside in the home with me. So that's almost scary. And if I'm receiving any type of other governmental assistance, I don't want to jeopardize what's happening within my family or within my home. So you know what, best bet, I'm just not going to count myself. And so we all just heard, from multiple examples from Michelle and Tom of the importance of when you get undercounted, this is what's going to happen within your county. And these are the huge detrimental effects that are going to affect you for the next 10 years. Because what I think a lot of people tend to forget about is the census is our foundation for the next 10 years. And that determines everything from the time we step outside of our house to the time we walk back in. This is because I was counted, my community was counted, my neighbors and everybody, they were counted. So if we are undercounting such a large population, then that means my state is going to hurt from it. And then that means that's going to personally affect my family and I. So through that mandate, it was almost just like, okay, well, if they're not going to count me, then I'm not going to count myself, but that's going to have, horrible effects going forward.
So how has that been resolved? What's the latest on that?
There was a court case. The President Trump was sued over his executive order that basically precluded being able to count undocumented people. And the results of the court case was that the president did not have the authority to do that through executive order. And so that's being allowed at this time.
Gotcha. And just, can we elaborate on why it is important to count people who are undocumented in the census?
It's important because they live here. Right. They're part of our community every single day. These are our friends, family, friends, neighbors. You never know, somebody's citizenship status, but they live here, they reside here, they have community, relationship. So of course you deserve to be counted and you deserve to have the resources that we as a community are getting. You deserve to have that poured back into, yourself and your family to benefit from these resources in a community in which you live and work in and thrive in on a day-to-day basis.
It also is definitely something that we need in terms of being able to plan our communities. We need to know how many people are here so we know what services to provide. I'm sure lots of people have driven by a school that had trailers on the outside of it because they had overcapacity. If you don't know how many kids you have, you can't plan your schools. In fact, we had a 1.5 million undercount of children in the last census, and that really has impacted not only our Peach Care program and our K-4 program, but also school planning moving forward. The same issue is kind of on the other end of the spectrum when you look at seniors not having adequate senior housing. As of last year, Gwinnett had a 2-year waiting list for senior housing in their county. If you don't know that your county has an older population or how many people are of a certain age in your county, you can't prepare correctly. And outside of the planning issue, just to go back to pure numbers, one person is said to be worth $2,300 per year of that census. There's $1.5 trillion in federal funding for 316 federal programs that are either exclusively use census data or they are informed by it to allocate that data. So every single person in your community counts because they help bring resources for programs and for outreach and for planning and for just growth in your county.
George, you've been patiently waiting over there.
Yeah, so let's get funky. Where are we counting prisoners these days?
Where they are imprisoned. That's also a case. That's also a difference from the 2010 census. And so they're part of group quarters. And so they don't fill out individual census. The warden fills it out for the jail, but it's where the jail is located.
And,
so you can see all of the reasons that stinks, right?
Yes. And that's also a term, it's called a prison mandering or a prison gerrymandering. And so you would realize, especially if we want to, let's keep it local for the state of Georgia, you would realize that we have a lot of prisons kind of in outskirt kind of counties, not so close to the city, or they may be in like rural counties. So sometimes you may find that some rural counties may have a huge surplus of money going into them. And you're like, oh, how is that happening when you have, X amount of citizens here, but then through the count of prisoners, that adds even more money back into their budget. So at times, like let's say if somebody, they are in Fulton County and then they have to go to like a southern county, let's say Coffee or Bacon County, to go serve their time, then residents in Coffee and Bacon County are gaining more resources and more money because of the bodies that are within those prisons.
Is any of that money being directed to the people who are in the prisons? No. Guess no.
I'm not 100% well versed on that.
Because there's 316 federal programs, I'm not well versed in all the different ones either, so I can't answer that question.
Michelle, I want to get back to, you said that in the last census there were 1.5 million kids that were undercounted. Did I hear that right?
That's right, under the age of 5.
How did that happen?
Well, for some reason, people don't forget they have babies. I think that has been one of the issues. We've been trying to figure that out. We've worked with a lot of different partners, and you fill out a census form for everyone in your household. So maybe if you're filling it out for mom and dad and you've got 4 or 5 kids, I'm not sure if you gave up at one point or maybe you didn't think it, but if you were a baby alive as of April 1st, you should have been counted in this census.
How much of that do you think is just straight fraud? Like somebody who's claiming a kid for tax purposes, but the kid doesn't actually exist.
Well, that wouldn't have anything to do with the census count because they don't share information with different areas. What it may actually would probably be the reverse, George, is if for whatever reason they had a kid and they, for whatever reason, they weren't supposed to have it, or maybe they were saying the kid lived with the mother, but the grandmother was raising the child and they were afraid that they were going to lose the benefits from getting that. But the one thing I think is really important that people need to understand about the census is this information is very much siloed and it's some of the most protected information the federal government collects. In fact, if you illegally disclose someone's census information, you're subject to a $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in jail. Also, like in terms of like my individual census information will not be released for 72 years. So that is very much secure. Yeah.
I'm interested in this stuff in part because I, for a time, served as a city council person for the city of Pine Lake, which has a population of roughly 750 people. And we're just below the number we need to get actual mail delivery service to the people who live here. We all have to go to the post office because we don't have enough people in town to justify having an actual postman drop things off at actual letterboxes in front of the house. It's, so I still have a 2010 Census shirt in my drawers somewhere. The other reason is because I work on homelessness stuff pretty regularly. That's kind of what I'm known for. And once a year, we all crawl under the bridges and into the abandoned buildings looking for folks who are homeless in order to count them for purposes of getting federal money for.
George?
It's just difficult.
Gotcha. We lost you for a second.
Sorry about that. So I was talking about how difficult it is to count homeless people in a normal year, never mind a COVID year. Like, I'm curious about the practical problems that you are all seeing, like the things that really are getting in between the folks who are trying to count and the folks who need to get counted.
Well, let's get to Michelle, because Tom, we'll start with you.
Well, no, I was going to say, I mean, when I've worked with cities on trying to do this, it's I usually try to find the destiny in that city, if you will, right? Somebody who's a community organizer, somebody who has a good understanding of, let's say, the grassroots makeup of the city. And so if I go into a city, I'll start calling. And I will say, do you know of homeless shelters? Do you know of churches that have like some kind of a homeless element to them? Is there something with the Red Cross? What do you know? Who do you know? And they're like, oh, have you talked to Destiny? And I'm like, no, give me Destiny's number. And then to your point, George, these are people who they go out under bridges and they round people up and they try to get them in their facility, make sure that they're clothed, make sure that they're fed. And they'll say, yeah, Destiny knows how many people are out there. She's got these 3 square blocks, whatever else. She rounds people up, periodically, make sure that they're fed, make sure that they've got clothing and whatever else. And so then I'll call her and say, hey, like, we need to know what are the facilities there so that we can count these people through this group quarter element. And so, I mean, cities that have, let's say, resourceful individuals, right? They can get a better count than cities where people will say, I don't want to know who that person is. We're not interested. And I'm like, okay, you want to know what the population of your city is. We got to go to grassroots, because you don't have a bunch of dorms or a bunch of colleges. You don't have some kind of a military installation that has a dormitory where people would live there, let's say, over a course of 9 months or 12 months. And so they wouldn't be counted elsewhere. We got to go find those people. And some cities just don't have, like, that grassroots person isn't there.
Well, typically the homeless population, there's a couple different things they do to prepare for that, George. One is before we even get started with the census, like over a year out, they do what's called a local update of census addresses. It's called LUCA. And that's when they're trying to figure out who lives where. And that includes people who are experiencing homelessness, transient populations, like where they gather. And so when they go to actually do the census counts, they have that type of information. But they have like a 2-day period that they have reserved for counting the homeless, which I believe is September 22nd through 24th for this census. And they also have almost a month period, which they call their account for what they call transient populations. It may be if I live in a camp or an RV place, or go hotel to hotel. And they work with community partners, as Tom was speaking about, in terms of like where to go for these people. They go to soup kitchens, they go to shelters, they go to different places in order to identify these people to make sure that they're counted.
So, Michelle, before the show started, you were talking about some of the challenges you were seeing in the response rates. Where do things stand right now? We apparently have a little bit of a reprieve. We've got until October 31st to figure this out. What's going on? What are you seeing that is creating these challenges of people feeling? Is it just everyone's distracted by COVID? What's going on?
Sure. I'm going to start with some statistics so it just comes to frame the conversation. As of an hour ago, the state of Georgia's total count was 97.3%.
Okay.
And that may sound pretty good, but the Census Bureau needs it to be 99%. And so we're not there yet. And actually, Georgia's ranked 45th nationally. And so we're not doing a good job with our counts. Overall, in terms of counties, there's two different counts that you can see publicly. There's one that's going to say it's a self-response count. And that means that's the person has mailed in their census form, the phone call, or they've done it online. And then there is the enumerated count, which means those are the door knockers that go door to door. And so for self-response rates for counties, right now we have 106 counties that are over 50%. And we have 54 counties that have done better in this census than they did in the last census. But to remind everyone, we have 159 counties, so only a third of our counties are doing better. In terms of issues that we've seen, one of the things that I've heard over and over again is boots on the ground. You've had a lot of these communities that they've done their advertising. I know Destiny talked a lot about social media events and trying to get to the folks. That was something that was really hard to deal with because of COVID-19, because there were a lot of outdoor events and person-to-person type of outreach that was planned, but because of COVID-19, the Census Bureau basically restricted their field operations for 4 months. And so that was the lag time that we didn't have. Furthermore, they have what's called this mobile questionnaire assistance, which they basically go into neighborhoods with low responses and have census workers go out with their tablets and take people's census information. And those are pretty helpful, especially in areas where maybe people don't have transportation to go somewhere, or they don't have internet connectivity or access. The problem with that is the Census Bureau wasn't going into any of the hot spots from COVID because of a protectionary method because of the outbreak. And unfortunately, a lot of the hot spots lined up with some of the worst census responses. For example, Hancock County is at the very bottom. I think today they have 27% of a self-response rate at the time that they were doing a lot of these mobile outreach from the Census Bureau, because they just started going back door to door in Georgia August the 7th. They couldn't go into Hancock County because they had a 13% positivity rate for COVID-19. One of the other issues that we've seen is there was a lot of prep work that went into making sure people in rural areas or areas that they don't have access to computers or they may have low connectivity had access. The General Assembly provided libraries with additional funding so they would have public computers available for people to go in to take the census. Fair Count did a really great job of going out and giving out hotspots and Chromebooks to a lot of different churches and neighborhood associations and different organizations so people could go in and take the census. But unfortunately, all these places that we had selected to do this outreach, public schools, churches, even senior citizens, senior centers, they weren't open. And they weren't open for many months. And so that definitely had an impact on our results as we've had to date.
This is a question, I don't know why this just popped into my head, but how often do we have a census that also coincides with the presidential election year? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Every 20 years.
Every 20 years. That's because I know the last time we did it, it wasn't a presidential, it was 2010. And I remember the big thing about that was there were a lot of QAnon-ish type conspiracy theories about census door knockers, and Fox News ran a lot of segments about that. And of course, it was normal census stuff that they do every time there's a census. I guess my question is I get the sense that we are screwing this up, that this census is going to be really screwed up because of COVID primarily. What are our options? Is there an option? Is there a do-over on this? Is there a way to extend it? Maybe go back in when there's a year where there's not a pandemic going on? What are the remedies for a census that gets screwed up?
That's actually an interesting question, Dan. I was just talking about that with a colleague today. I think just at first blush, without having any research on it, that it would definitely require congressional action because, again, it's in federal law that we have to have a census and the dates it has to be delivered to president, to Congress, and then to the states, because you forget the states use that data for redistricting purposes. So anything from congressional districts down to your county commission and your school board districts, we need that data for that. And so if they were going to actually do a complete do-over, it would definitely make it they'd have to change federal law. And if they wanted to kind of push forward, like if they decided they wanted to have census collections through the end of December and then move the other dates again, that would take congressional action. There's actually a bill in the Senate right now that is a bipartisan bill, the U.S. Senate, that would extend out the dates for the census beyond the December 31st date and beyond the March date. And it's Senator Perdue is one of the co-sponsors of it, and it's got a lot of support. But these type of actions have been in several different bills since April, and they haven't passed yet. So at this point, I'm not really it would take a lot of effort to have to redo the census.
So Tom mentioned earlier that the support for the census seems to be a pretty bipartisan thing, that everybody wants to be counted and have. So why wouldn't a bill to extend the census move right along? I mean, I think it would be in everyone's interest to have an accurate count, right?
It would be, but it's been embedded in all of the CARES Funding Act. I want to say that it passed the House through the HEROES Act, but it wasn't part of the HEALS Act that was in the Senate. And so it hasn't been a standalone bill until the one that was just introduced a couple weeks ago in the Senate. So I'm sure that has a lot to do with it in terms of not being able to agree on the other issues.
So it sounds like a do-over is iffy at best. As of right now, what can be done under these circumstances and within this time frame to improve our response rate and get the numbers up to where they need to be? I guess the first question really is, how do we know that we've screwed this up? What is the metric that we can use? Is it comparing it to previous years? How are we going to know that we have made an error and significantly undercounted people this year because of COVID and all this other stuff?
I feel like it's going to be one of those situations we're not going to know until down the road. It's not going to be an immediate impact. I will tell you that we have done a little research to look at how counties were in the 2000 census between 2000 and 2010 to figure out who exceeded their 2000 rate in 2010, and then again between 2010 and 2020. And one thing that I found that was really interesting, we actually have more counties that did better, like from their rate from 2010 to 2020 than in the previous set. However, the ones that have not exceeded it, those are the ones that there's a really big gap. For example, Jenkins County is 26% behind where they were in 2010 in terms of the response rate. And when you look at the different counties that have not done well this census or the response rate, they're almost all exclusively rural counties, poor counties, a lot of them being in Southwest Georgia. One of the unknowns about the count that we're really not going to know until we get the full enumerated count for each county is we have heard from several of our people in the field that they may have had a large mail-in campaign from their county, meaning a lot of their citizens, they decided to mail it in rather than go online or take it over the phone. And that there apparently appears to be a pretty significant backlog at the Census Bureau for inputting and counting the paper ballots because they've had reductions in force due to COVID. So some of these percentages may not be as bad if they don't have the paper forms. But again, that's not going to be something we're going to know until after we get the full count.
So just going around there, George.
All right. You were saying Georgia looks like they're at about 97.3% right now, give or take. And obviously that's a guess because if you knew exactly how much it was, well, your count would be done. But that means 2.7% is uncounted. And I'm imagining these are people who tend to be hard to count. So some of that's got to be because people are in the hospital or moving or very young. Some of this has got to be because people are knuckleheads. And I'm curious, I go around the horn here. Who are these 2.7%?
So hard to count is really kind of the motif of the census. And essentially what that is, and especially for hard to count areas within Georgia, that can be for college towns. So before COVID-19 really hit, a lot of students already were back on campus. And so through the University System of Georgia, they all agreed to say, yes, we will allow census enumerators to come in and count all of the students that are housing or living in our dorms. So when COVID-19 really started happening, they sent a lot of students back home. So that is kind of a toss up of whether students were counted on campus, or now you kind of have a lot of organizations telling parents, hey, if your child is back at home, make sure that you count them. Another huge population that is undercounted are Black and Brown communities, and especially in downtown or like urban areas. And it also can come from kind of a distrust of, okay, well, now this is a federal document. They're saying they want all this information on my family, on myself. I don't know if I really feel comfortable about it. How do I know, are we really going to get the money that they say that we're going to get? Do we know that's
They're being
really
so nice.
So that is another huge problem, especially like the Chamblee area, Doraville, Vine City, Peoplestown, especially immigrant populations. And we spoke on that. We were able to touch on that a little bit earlier today. But hard to count areas, that is something that we really, really need to focus on. Like Michelle was saying, for transient people, whether you are you may be homeless or you may be in a group home, you may live in an apartment and you may be moving during that time, that can also count you as transitory. So it's really, really important that we focus on that area, what is happening. And then also, like Michelle was also saying, Georgia is a huge rural state. We are an agricultural state. And in a lot of these southwestern, southeastern counties, coastal counties, they do not have the broadband or internet capability that you and I may have, how we're all sitting here on Zoom right now. They can't do that. And a lot of these counties have a lot of seniors, and a lot of seniors may not know, hey, I can go online now to fill out my census. So we need to make sure, as family members, community members, I know this woman, she goes to church, or her granddaughter goes to my church. Let me make sure I reach out to her. We need to make sure that we are kind of taking it into our own hands, and we are, hey, don't forget to complete your 2020 census. Tell 5 friends to do it. People are not answering the door for census enumerators. They're like, oh, I'm not going to do it. They may not feel comfortable of someone knocking on their door like, hey, don't forget to fill out your 2020 census. A lot of people may have distrust again towards that, kind of how you were saying, about like what a census enumerator may look like. So the Census Bureau, they were able to, on their website, you can go on there. They literally tell you down to a T what a census enumerator should have on, what the badge should look like, what the bag that they have should look like, what things they should have in their hand, because some people may be scared of like, oh, this may be another governmental agency knocking on my door, so I'm not even going to open the door to even take that risk. So it's really, really, really important that we understand that the census is very personal to our everyday life, to our livelihood for the next 10 years. And we are taking that charge and responsibility incredibly serious, because like I said, it does determine the next 10 years. It determines redistricting. Like Michelle was saying, it determines education. It determines transit, what's happening, especially for our metro Atlanta area. When we have MARTA, there are at times, we have some counties that have beautiful MARTA stations and they're running on time. They're doing everything that they need to do. And you go to other counties and people's closest MARTA stops are a mile walk away from their home. The census helps determine that. We realize we have this many people here. We're going to make sure that they do their best to get the money back out into these communities, into these areas.
So I have a question from a viewer. I regret, I wish there was more interest in this topic, but hopefully we'll get more views on the YouTubes. But the question is, what can the average person who has completed the census do to help Georgia get to 99%?
Well, I'll start off the conversation. One of the things I would definitely say is don't assume people in your circle have taken the census. There's been so many things that has distracted us from the census this year, from COVID-19, pandemics, Tiger King. I mean, there's been a lot of things out there. And so I would definitely make sure to talk to your coworkers, your family, your friends. If you attend a faith institution, a church, or a synagogue, make sure that your faith leader is discussing that to the congregation or mentioning it to the congregation. And just make sure the outreach in the circles that you have through work. I'm driving everyone crazy at work, making sure they've taken the census. And so I would definitely recommend that you make sure all your bases are covered.
Does anyone else want to take another swipe at it?
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I was just going to mention, and this kind of dovetails into what George was saying. I mean, one of the populations that do slip into the cracks, or between the cracks, are elderly. If you have, let's suppose you have a mother-in-law who's living in an assisted living facility, and somebody asks you, George, like, okay, how many people live in your household unit? And your mother's not there, and so you're like, okay, I've got 2 people here. And you're not even thinking that your mother, who lives maybe a mile away or 2 miles away, you figure, okay, well, she'll take care of herself, or somebody at that facility is going to mention that she's there, right? Well, that. I mean, frequently that just slips in between the cracks, if you will, right? And even if they're in your household unit, if they're not part of your household unit, you might not think about them. So, like my mother-in-law, she lives in an apartment. I've got an in-law apartment in my basement. And so if we're asked how many people live in your household unit versus how many people are in your house, well, she's got sort of a separate address, same house, but a separate address. So it's like, okay, are you counting my mother-in-law as well? Like, make sure you count her. If I'm not thinking about it, easily can slip into oblivion, right? And so you said, like, oh my gosh, we just lost these people. We don't even know that they're around. So it's not 100% knuckleheads. It can be a lot of times you're just not even thinking about, has this person been counted? And I think what Michelle said is really on point, and that is, ask around and make sure, like, hey, did your mother-in-law get counted? Right, your folks, aren't they living over here? Did they get counted? Do they know that they can that they should be counted? I mean, there's that as well. Or my son, who was living at a dorm, right? It's like, okay, dude, make sure that you get counted. Like, we're not counting. You're not living here right now. You're living there. So make sure that you get counted. And that's just because you're out of sight, out of mind, if you will.
So we have I'm sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
I was going to say, just one thing to kind of keep in mind too. I know we talked about a lot of the different groups who might not be participating for one reason or the other, but one thing that we haven't discussed yet, I think that's important for people to know, is in our more rural areas, sometimes people do not get their mail delivered at home. They get it delivered to the post office. And there is a system for which during each census, they're supposed to deliver a packet to everyone's home. And it usually goes out like sometime in April. It didn't get delivered until the end of June. And that disproportionately impacted rural Georgia, because a lot of people in rural Georgia, and apparently George, don't get their mail at home. And then also kind of exacerbating that issue is the fact that a lot of the folks in rural Georgia, they live far apart. So it's not like you can just take, a group to go to an apartment building or a neighborhood and get a count out. You may have 12, 15 miles between your neighbors. And so if they don't have a car, they haven't gotten the paper form, they don't have the internet. And then bonus, we found out that the census phone number had some issues at some times during the summer because there were so many people trying to use the phone. And if you had like a prepaid phone with so many minutes, you're not going to spend your minutes waiting on the Census Bureau. And so for some of these people, but for someone coming to their house, they really didn't have an opportunity.
I got you. Well, we do have a few minutes left. Destiny had asked earlier if she could talk about voter registration for a minute, and I told her I would be glad to let her do that. So, Destiny, I will give you the floor for just a sec.
Yes, it will be very, very quick. A really cool thing that I want people to know is that the census serves as a precursor for voting. So they are hand in hand, they go together. We need people to understand, again, the severity of completing the census and making sure you are registered to vote. For the state of Georgia, this upcoming Monday, October 5th, is the last day. Again, October 5th is the last day for Georgians to be registered to vote. The state of Georgia does not allow same-day registration. It is imperative that you all check your voter registration consistently, even if you voted earlier this summer. Make sure you check your voter registration and make sure it is active. You can go online to mvp.sos.ga.gov. Again, mvp.sos.ga.gov. So again, October 5th is a really important date for you to remember. And then, thank you. Then October 12th through the 30th. This is another huge thing that we want people to understand and know. So the state of Georgia does not end up on national news again because of voter suppression, and we were not ready for anything at all when it came to voting. we want to make sure that you are out there doing early voting. So again, early voting is October 12th through October 30th. That is 18 full days for us to make sure that we go out there and we vote. So the really cool thing about early voting is you do not have to go to the exact precinct that is listed on your voter registration. When you early vote, you can go to any precinct within your county. And then on November 3rd, if you wait until November 3rd, the day of the general election, then you must go to the precinct that is listed on your voter registration. When you go out to get registered to vote, Georgia has an exact ID match. Whatever your ID says on your card, make sure you write that on your voter registration application. The state of Georgia will not allow you, let's say we go, October 12th, and there's something missing on your license that is not on your voter registration application, they will not allow you to vote. And again, I cannot stress enough to check your voter registration status. July of 2017, the state of Georgia purged 560,000 plus registered voters under this use it or lose it policy. And essentially what that means is if you have not voted in recent elections, like local, city, or state elections, they will say, hey, you must not be interested in voting. Will knock you off the roll. We need to make sure we are out there voting. So one, it's important that you check your voter registration. Second, it's important that you have a voting plan. I cannot stress that enough. A voting plan sounds super simple because it is super simple. That is just, hey, I know where my precinct is at. I know where I can go. I know the important dates, October 5th, October 12th through the 30th. And I'm going to make sure that I go out there and I exercise my right to vote. And through your voting plan, we also want to make sure that you are educated on who you are voting on. Again, voting does not stop at the presidential level. It does not stop at the federal level. It's so imperative that we also vote for our local and city leaders. You may see a bunch of different signs. You may see signs in people's yards as you're driving down the street. Hey, re-elect so-and-so, or so-and-so is running for election. Look up what these positions are, look up what they have to do, and then look up the person or the candidate and who you are interested in voting on. So you are educated when you go up to the booth, you are educated on who you are voting for. And lastly, voter mobilization. That is a huge, 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 huge thing. Please, I understand that we are in the time of COVID, so please make sure that you feel comfortable enough. But if you do, please bring people with you to the polls. It is imperative that we do this. So make sure you have your mask, make sure you have your gloves, bring some water with you just in case the lines do get long. I know lines may get long. I know we may be tired, but that helps if you go do early voting. There are so many different precincts for the Fulton County. They just opened up 90 more precincts. Fayette County, they have 36 precincts for day of for like November 3rd registration. But I can create all this. We have all this information for you all. And Dan, I'll be sure to send it to you when everything is done, so you can send this out to all of your viewers and listeners. Guys, it is so, so important that we understand what is happening. And then just to tie in the census with it, if we have not stressed it enough, once you get counted, that means you have representation. And through that representation, that means that can open up more seats for local elections, for state elections, for federal elections. That means we can have more like-minded people that have that same ideals as you, that have the same ideals as your community, that can be a voice for your community. So it is imperative that you vote on local, state, and of course our federal election. So don't forget, Monday, October 5th, last day for Georgians to register to vote. October 12th through the 30th, that is early voting. So we really, really hope to see you all out there at the polls. Of course, being socially distant with your mask and your gloves.
I want to say amen to all of that. I will add that you can also, if you've gotten your absentee ballot, there is a state website where you can check the status. We got our absentee ballots today. My wife and I both went to the elections board and we dropped our absentee ballots off at the elections board. My wife has a comorbidity, so we're trying to be a little careful. But I would encourage people to, if you're going to use a drop box, I mean, I assume they're all fine. I personally use the one at the elections board. It's right there. I know somebody at the election board is going to come get it. And apparently a lot of other people had the same idea, because when we went to vote at 2 o'clock today, there was a line of people steadily going in and out and dropping off their ballot. So there is a lot going on. I want to thank our guests, Michelle, Tom, Destiny, and George, for joining us today for this very important discussion. I do feel a little like Smokey the Bear with all these PSAs, but I'm going to repeat them all for everybody. Take your census. It's easy. You can do it online. Take your census if you have not done so. Register to vote. Check your voter registration status, even if you think you are registered. The voter registration deadline is Monday, October 5th. Get your flu shot. Please get your flu shot. It's very important. Vote, of course. Vote in the upcoming elections. When you do vote, wear your mask. Wear your mask. George, you
gotta go.
Okay.
Just that. Hey, go vote. Wear your mask.
Wear your mask.
Take your census. Take vitamins. Don't do drugs. Drive with a seatbelt on. Bye.
Bye, George. We're going to return with the Decaturish Twitch Show this coming Wednesday. We tape every Wednesday and Friday at 6 o'clock. I don't know what the guests are going to be, but that's nothing new. I'll figure it out, and I'll let you know as soon as I know. So take care, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.